But it's like we made like 30 single the last 30 years. Let's say. I did. I did. I was mispressed presentation for the world. Actually, where were you in the office? I was at meetings and APP. What did you do? Wow, what I doing? How you got that? Oh, yeah. Good. Like We're gonna do lunch. What's that? We got on there. Well, what? No, the village is down.
Let's get started. Good morning and welcome back. Hope you all had a good weekend. We are now halfway through the term, getting into week number 6 out of 10. So we are moving right along and headed pretty close to the finish line here. So let's go ahead and get rolling today. So last week we talked about organizational culture theory. This is the theory that examines human behavior, the ways in which people in organizations and groups such as Valve structure themselves, engage in the needs of their populations, and collaborate with each other effectively to achieve particular goals. We had Luli, who gave a presentation that did a great job of getting into more details about organizational culture, including many of the ways organizational culture comes from the top, and the structure. Perhaps a president or CEO is going to dictate the organization of the group as a whole. So we took some time to talk about ethnography last class, which is the study that involves using participant observation and field notes to understand a culture in this organization, right? So ethnography involves going in, kind of participating in and taking notes at the site. So it might involve going into a company, organization, or group and looking into that and some of the ways that that group behaves and uses communication to work together. So if you were interested in organizational culture theory for your first application paper, there's a couple ways you could do this. First of all, you could look at a fictional example, like mediated example. I brought up examples like The Office. Another way you could do this is to actually look at some kind of company, group, or organization out in the world and explore some of the ways that that group is structured, its use of culture, and so on. So there's a lot of different ways that you might consider if this is your choice for your first application. So today we're going to be talking about rhetoric. This is an area that I think is familiar to a lot of people if you've taken a course in English, writing, and rhetoric. If you have taken other communication courses, it's probably brought up in some capacity. Rhetoric is closely connected and in many situations is in communication. It's also an area of my expertise. So this is an area I'd like to talk about. And we'll have Britt, who will be giving a course class presentation in just a little bit, talking about rhetoric as well. So a few reminders. So the first reminder here is that your first application paper assignment is due this Sunday, May 14th. So if you need an extension on this assignment, I encourage you to shoot me an email by the end of the day today. If you anticipate that you're traveling, if you anticipate a conflict, if you have a lot of exams or other things that come up, let me know and I'm happy to give you an extension in advance. Just give me the date that you would hope to turn in the extended assignment. Optional, but you're always welcome to submit a rough draft or outline to me. I can review and get that back to you with my feedback as long as you get that into me by Friday. And I should also note, in an effort to help you to prepare and to think about what you're going to do on this assignment, Friday's class is an attendance optional workshop. So you're welcome to come in. I'll be here. I'll be available to answer questions. Space is yours if you want an accountability buddy space, or you just like to kind of share your draft or what you're working on. But you do not need to come to class if you don't want to. So attendance will not be taken on Friday. And remember that the purpose of this application paper, right, is that you're using the theory to explain and to understand the artifact. And the artifact can be any kind of piece of communication that's tangible, and is generally publicly available. So again, I looked at a variety of examples, like an episode of a show, a film, a song, a video game, a speech or public address, right? A video, any form of communication you feel like is connected to one of those theories is a good thing. I discourage you from using like an example from your own life, because while that was good for the reflection paper, this is that would be a little bit harder to verify or to confirm to large class. So make sure it's a piece of communication that's tangible and more widely available. If you're not quite sure which idea to go with, or not quite sure if your idea is the right fit for this assignment, let me know, and I'm happy to talk to you about your ideas. And again, pick one of the theories that we've been talking about so far to use for this assignment. Any questions about the first application paper due on Sunday? Again, the assignment description and rubrics designed to help you out and know exactly what you need to submit when you get that in. So I look forward to seeing you work on this. Again, it's okay if it's not perfect, right? You'll do 2 application papers and then you'll pick one to revise and incorporate into your final assignment at the end of the Okay, so let's take some time to get into rhetoric and some of the details surrounding rhetoric and the way that rhetoric is used. How many folks have taken a class that involves rhetoric in some capacity or has talked about rhetoric with some level of detail? Okay, so a little less than half. So I'll go over some fundamentals, which might be some review for people, as well as some things that hopefully can expand your knowledge of this topic, right? So when we talk about rhetoric, oftentimes we think about this in a pejorative way, right? People hear the term rhetoric and they think, oh, that's just rhetoric or political rhetoric. It's like bees buzzing. It's like people arguing and it doesn't seem like it's tied toward good outcomes. But if we think about rhetoric and what it's really about, rhetoric is ultimately about how communication influences, drives, and impacts people. That is, every single day we're exposed to messages, ideas that change our lives, that shape who we are, right? We are influenced by and we influence with rhetoric. Rhetoric dates all the way back to the ancient Greeks, right? Who, including Aristotle and Plato, were concerned with rhetoric as the available means of persuasion. That is, if somebody is asked to speak in front of a crowd, if somebody is asked to engage using social media, if somebody is addressing an audience in any kind of meaningful way, right? How are they using that situation to convey meaning or understanding to the population that they're working with? So rhetoric is about how we use persuasion and influence with each other. It's very broad, it covers a whole lot, and rhetoric has been studied, circulated, used in many different ways over thousands of years to get to where we are today. It should come as no surprise that rhetoric is rhetorical, public and rhetorical, interpretive, hermeneutic, and critical. So we're going to see a number of theories that take on both the interpretive bent as well as the critical bent, right? So positivistic is about data, numbers, quantifying information. Interpretive is about making sense of human information in a more qualitative way. And critical is concerned about power, right? How is power impacting our understanding of issues? How is power used? And interrogating power. So this is interpretive as well as critical. It's interpreting and understanding how persuasion is used, but it's also being critical of the messages and themes that we might be exposed to and how those messages are conveying meaning. So we've had a lot of different types of examples in the course. One example that I wanted to give for this theory is actually kind of a literary theatrical example. So if you're familiar with the Julius Caesar play, there's a key moment in that play where following Caesar's death, Mark Antony, who is very sympathetic to Caesar and his cause, is called to give a speech to the broader public. And the strategies and tactics used in the speech, right, not only in terms of kind of Shakespeare's wordplay and choices, but also the framing of the speech in many ways shows us fundamentals of rhetoric and action. So we'll be getting to that in just a little bit. So rhetoric brings about a variety of different assumptions to the table, right? And rhetoric is a very broad umbrella. Within that, there are a lot of theories about rhetoric. For example, invitational rhetoric is an approach used in a lot of feminist criticism to suggest some of the ways that rhetoric invites people in. So there's a variety of things within rhetoric, but we're talking about rhetoric in the general sense. If somebody is an effective speaker or presenter, right, and this could be something like a public speech to a live audience, or this could be something such as social media, advertising, public relations, reaching a broader public in any way. Because again, the origins of this theory came before we had technology, but it's been applied and used in considering technology and its changes. An effective speaker is going to think about the audience that they're addressing. Who is it that I'm trying to speak to? What is the experience that this audience has? How is the experience of this audience relevant to the points that I'm trying to make? And how can I modify and modulate the points that I'm giving in my speech or presentation in a way that best resonates and supports the audience? In so doing, speaker is developing argumentative proofs. They're creating main points or ideas that will help them to develop the key findings and thoughts that emerge from the study itself, right? So an effective speaker has building blocks of an argument that they're using and sharing. You're taking a class like public speaking, the use of persuasive speaking is getting at the core of these types of issues. Or if you've ever seen something such as a State of the Union or a presidential debate, right? A lot of these types of presentations are concerned with using persuasion too. So effective speakers are getting a feel for and trying to engage and understand the audience. That is, an effective public speaker is going to consider and kind of affect the types of claims that they're making based on the audience, right? So Governor Tina Kotek is doing a kind of tour of the state, right, where she's trying to go to different regions and communicate to people through things like town halls. She's actually just in LeGrand last week, right, she went to Bella. And I would imagine, right, that the strategy she used to communicate in Eastern Oregon is very different from the strategy used to communicate in Portland or Salem. So the ability to understand and try to engage the needs of the audience and the group, you can argue whether or not it's done effectively, right, is an important component for us to consider. What are the concerns, the issues, the challenges that are facing our audience, and how does our effort at persuading that audience make sense with their values, their beliefs, and their concerns coming to the table? So when it comes to the core of rhetoric, one of the biggest things that we need to look at here is the use of different types of proofs. So again, going all the way back to Aristotle's rhetoric, there are three core proofs that are used in order to determine what claims are being made and how those claims are being supported in arguments. One of them is about ethos, right? So ethos is about the use of credibility. It's about drawing upon your own background and your own experience and doing so in an effective way that shows why you are somebody worth listening to. You know, as a CEO with over 20 years of experience and working in renewable energy, I have a lot to say about the future of the environment, right? So it's drawing upon your own background, perspective, showing why you're a unique fit, right? So for instance, you might say, I grew up in Eastern Oregon as well. I understand some of the concerns and challenges you, the population, might be dealing with. Logos is the use of logic, right? It's about how we structure our claims in such a way that they flow and fit together in a way that makes sense. One of the most classic examples that we'll get to in just a second being syllogism, where we structure arguments in a formal organizational context to get people on board. And then lastly, there's the use of pathos. So pathos is how we use emotions and feelings such as an appeal to pity, an appeal to anger, of sorrow, of grief, of happiness, as a way to draw in listeners and make an argument. One really good example of the use of pathos is if you have ever seen like a commercial, the really sad commercials like through the ASPCA or similar organizations encouraging you to adopt pets, right? That oftentimes will show animals in cages that will depict things such as animal abuse, like that'll be black and white, and will like play very sad music over them. Like it's using pity and it's using our concerns and fears as a means of motivating us to adopt a pet, right? So that's the use of pathos. It should be noted, right, that the Greeks, their belief was the idea, you might be familiar with sophistry, right? The idea that ideally all we have is logos, all we have is logic. The perfect world, people would make logical, informed decisions. That's the only thing that would matter, right? But there's an acknowledgement that, first of all, not everybody is going to be trustworthy. Not everybody is coming in with good intentions. So ethos matters. We have to understand the credibility, right? Especially in a world of information that might be incorrect and not fact-checked. And second of all, that people are human, right? We're motivated by emotions. We're motivated by how we feel. So oftentimes, just a pure appeal to logic is not always going to work as a strategy. You have to think about this more holistically, considering the other elements of human experience. So in addition to the major proofs, right, we have what are known as different claims. I like to think about this like a bow and arrow, right? So if you're firing a bow and arrow, the point of the arrow is your claim. It's the literal point that you're trying to make. It's the sentence or statement that you're using to frame the rest of a speech, a presentation, and so on. Again, a lot of the history of rhetoric has been looking at public address, speeches from famous figures such as MLK or Abraham Lincoln, right, and examining the strategies that they use and the content of their speeches. A claim of fact is asserting whether something is true or correct about the world, right? Saying the sky is blue. We are in LaGrande, Oregon. That is a claim of fact that says this thing is correct, this thing is true. We notice that a lot of times there is debate over claims of fact, right? Climate change is caused by humans, right? That is an example of claim type. The earth is round is another example, right, of the type of claim type that others might choose to dispute. So think about it as like, you know, you're at a baggage claim, you're trying to get a bag, right? You have to claim that the bag is yours in the same way that claiming is assessing the truth value of a statement. Value claims are very common in a lot of kind of social and political discourse. This is about how we're comparing two things and we're assessing the worth between those things. Right? So one example that I like to give is in a lot of discussions about you know, kind of surveillance, wiretapping, the Patriot Act and similar legislative measures that have kind of led to government oversight and monitoring of our online activity, right? We might say that national security is more important than individual freedom, right? That's a claim of value that's being made that assesses one thing as being more important than the other. Vice versa, you could say, no, I think individual freedom is more important than national security in this context, and so on. If you have ever had any involvement with high school debate, or you've seen it in the past debate, or the format called Lincoln Douglas debate, where basically you and your opponent would each pick a value and explain why your value is the most important to addressing a particular topic. So for example, we had a topic called jury nullification as a just check on government, where essentially a jury gets to go against the evidence if they believe that somebody should be innocent for a crime, and the value of justice might be used to examine that issue. And then lastly, policy claims. So policy are about specific actors taking specific actions, right? So it might be that the United States federal government should increase the federal minimum wage, right? That is a clear actor, USFG, US federal government, should take a specific action, in this case, raising minimum wage. That doesn't necessarily have to be a governmental entity or organization. Sometimes it can be a personal thing, right? You should go and get a doctor's appointment, actually works as a policy claim because it's specifying what you should do as a person. So policy claims are used a lot in kind of pressuring or motivating action. They're used a lot by nonprofits, other entities and groups in trying to get various actions implemented. As mentioned, when it comes to logos and the use of logical and structured claims, one of the most common ways of structuring logical arguments here is the use of the syllogism. So the syllogism, again, goes all the way back to Aristotle. You might be familiar with its usage in that context. The way to break down a syllogism is break down logical arguments. A equals B is B equals C, therefore A equals C. In other words, you start typically with a major premise or overarching claim. You start with a minor premise or situation, and then you're leading to a conclusion where you're bridging those things together, right? Think about it as kind of like one of those logic puzzles. All men are mortal. That's A. Socrates is a man. B. Therefore, Socrates is moral. Therefore, A equals C. So the syllogism is used a lot when you're making a structured logical argument, right? I think that we can all agree that, the unneeded suffering of pets is a bad thing. Pets are suffering out in the world. Therefore, I encourage you to adopt a pet, right? So we make these types of claims, even if they're not structured in that formal way. Generally speaking, we're guiding people along values, beliefs, facts that they already believe to lead them to a different conclusion that is consistent with the beliefs that they already have, right? It's a lot easier to persuade somebody to move in a direction based on the beliefs they already have than it is to adopt an entirely different belief system in order to address a topic. Another way of conducting an analysis of rhetoric, right, of using this type of style to analyze a piece of communication, again, whether it be a speech, presentation, public relations, advertising, and so forth, is to look at what are known as 5 different canons that lead to the creation of something on speech. So one canon is the use of invention. So in other words, how are key ideas, arguments, and points being arranged and put into a speech? Like, what are the building blocks? What are the pieces of a speech that are being included? So you might look at, for instance, a presentation where somebody talks about their experience with family, an experience related to violence that motivated their interest in public service. So what are the pieces the speaker is putting into this, right? How have they created this? Arrangement is then taking those building blocks and assembling them. So how is this speech organized? Perhaps this speech begins with a poem and uses personal experience as it connects to the poem. Perhaps the speech begins with its most controversial and disagreeable point and then moves into more acceptable points, right? So arrangement is very much about how you are making deliberate choices. In classes like public speaking, I encourage a couple things. First of all, we have to think about recency bias. People are most likely to remember the beginning and end of something. So typically framing early on and reviewing at the end can be really useful. Tell me what you're going to tell me. Tell me what you told me. That can be a good way to use arrangement effectively to make sure that people remember your points. But you can also think about how transitions between points are being used to build and effectively convey an argument. A lot of analysis of rhetoric of texts is looking at how they are building and making their argument through its organization. Another thing to consider here is style, right? So style is particularly looking at the use of language. How are language choices impacting and embellishing the speech in some way? So for instance, perhaps somebody talks about how they were driving on the way to campus and they noticed the iridescent trees, lighting the valley. So using that type of word choice, term iridescent, and using that kind of visual imagery can be a way to really make a point. There's also a lot of very charged language that can be incorporated, right? Talking about the language of, for instance, pro-life, pro-choice. That is very charged language that's going to draw some people away, bring some people in. So thinking about the deliberate choices that are being made here is an important element of understanding and using rhetoric. Additionally, delivery. How is the speech presented, right? So if we look at kind of the verbal presentation of a speech, how are they using nonverbal communication, gesturing, physicality? How are they positioning and presenting themselves? If they're presenting over Zoom, how are they presenting? Are they muted? Did they not realize that they were muted for 40 minutes? Like, what is going on here and how they are physically presenting their points? And then memory, right, refers to how a speaker or presenter draws from their own background or memory and uses their own experience as a means of connecting what they've prepared to what they end up getting, right? The worst thing is somebody who comes up and forgets or draws a blank, right, in the middle of their presentation or speech. Or there's the trope, right? Oftentimes we'll see it like a wedding toast or a eulogy where this gets used a lot in movies where somebody has a prepared statement and then they just crumple it and toss it up and they're like, forget it. I'm just going to wing it. I'm just going to say what I really think. So to what what degree people retain information about the speech, memorize, use an outline, and use other material to present is another element that is looked at too. In addition to that, there are different situations and contexts that draw upon us understanding and analyzing rhetoric. So the three different types of rhetoric are considered forensic, epididactic, and deliberative. So forensic is about the past, right? So forensic rhetoric and the study of forensic rhetoric is about how we establish the various facts, how we pursue justice, or how we pursue an understanding of past issues. You watch crime shows like CSI, Criminal Minds, right? A lot of these types of shows, the whole premise is that there's some type of crime or murder that's been committed, and the whole show is built off of them trying to uncover, analyze, and figure out the crime, figure out who did it, right? That's forensic. That is making sense of the past. In ancient Greece, this was about a court of law. This was about how people were using a court to determine somebody's innocence or guilt. If you've read any of Plato's 5 dialogues, right? There is the apology. There is the kind of public case where Socrates is put on trial, and there's an extensive conversation about making sense of the past. So epididactic, praise and blame in the present, is very much associated with values, it's associated with beliefs, how we feel in the moment. So epididactic rhetoric is in many ways related to our current feelings. For instance, again, something like the white toast, a roast, a eulogy, some type of address where you are called upon to speak and address the feelings and concerns that are happening in the moment. So analyzing something like a funeral eulogy would be an example of epididactic, of really kind of focusing on the present. And then deliberative is about the future, right? Generally speaking, this is more policy oriented, but this is about how we are making decisions going forward and having the skill set and discussion and debate needed in order to effectively move forward on these ideas. So for example, if you watch a video of a member of Congress who's advocating for the passage of a specific bill, they're making a deliberative decision. They're saying, we need to do X, Y, Z, and here's our rationale for doing that, right? So deliberative is about making this claim about what we should do and act on in the future. So these are a lot of fundamentals of rhetoric, again, thinking about the canons, thinking about the different types of rhetoric, thinking about the situations in which rhetoric arises is useful, and drawing upon some of the key concepts and ideas from rhetoric is a really good way that you can create a well-organized and structured analysis if you choose this for an application. So one critique here is that the study of rhetoric, at least the very traditional study of rhetoric, is certainly outdated. And again, rhetoric is very malleable, it's changed, it's adjusted, it's considered in a lot of forms of digital communication. But we're not typically being motivated by seeing somebody give a speech and being moved by that speech, right? The public address, the emphasis on public address is not there in the same way. There's a variety of reasons, things like social and political polarization that we could look to as an example of this. Things such as the State of the Union address are getting less and less popular. Viewership and numbers of those go down. People are less interested and engaged unless it's reinforcing existing viewpoints. So a lot of critique is that the traditional study of rhetoric as giving and presenting speeches, those things are not necessarily important in the same way as something like algorithms, the use of receiving material on social media, and that type of information is being presented. So in many ways, the kind of use of the study of rhetoric is not being responsive to the way things change. But it's interesting to see some of the ways that rhetoric is changing in response to a variety of issues. For example, there's been contemporary work in rhetoric that has analyzed the use of TikTok, right? And how TikToks are being created and engaged with people as a means of persuading them about particular issues. There's a lot of applications we could look at. Another concern here is who is being analyzed, right? So the kind of problem with a lot of the history of rhetoric and study of rhetoric is that a lot of it, again, going back to ancient Greece, was dead white people writing and analyzing about how great of speakers other dead white people, right? And that was a problem with a lot of the history of rhetoric, but we've seen a lot of changes For example, there are a lot of authors, including Dr. Carmen Chavez, who have talked about the importance of racial rhetorical criticism, about understanding and making sense of rhetoric as it impacts Black and African American communities, focusing on reframing what rhetoric is, who rhetoric is for. Again, feminist rhetoric, rhetorical criticism, queer rhetoric. There's a lot of work that's being done to decenter the tradition and history of who is being analyzed and in what ways, and challenging a lot of the fundamental ways that rhetoric was initially conceived. So there's a lot that goes into analyzing, well, who is being looked at here? Who is being studied through the process of doing this? And then lastly, it's important to consider the demographics, right? The time of the Greeks, this is a time in which, we had very public displays, presentations, speaking in front of a large group was very common, didn't have social media. So there's a lot of big differences in terms of what was effective and what changed hearts and minds then versus what did now. Again, things like family, culture, background, friends, and those kinds of networks play a lot more influence and role in our lives than we might have seen before. Okay, so we have Britt, who will be giving us a presentation today, talking about and applying key ideas here in rhetoric. Okay, so you are welcome to click or use the arrow keys as you're working through it.
Well, the article I chose is Mining and Poverty Reduction, Transforming Rhetoric into Reality. So basically, the article evaluates the contribution that mining has made to poverty reduction and assesses the prospects for better performance in the future. So basically, the article explains problems with existing approaches to mining and evaluates the World Bank, which is the leading advocate for mining-led developments. Their recently concluded Extractive Industries Review as a dramatic paradigm shift in thinking of mining and poverty reduction. It concludes that mining can positively contribute towards poverty reduction, but only if a variety of demanding preconditions are met. So some of the key ideas, it just talks about, it provides an insightful analysis of the relationship between mining and poverty reduction in developing countries. And then it also discusses the rhetoric surrounding the potential for mining to contribute to poverty and argues that while rhetoric exists, the reality on ground is often different. And Scott Pegg, who wrote the article, argues that while mining has the potential to contribute to poverty reduction through employment opportunities and revenue generation, the reality is much different, and mining could actually worsen poverty due to factors such as corruption or inadequate government policies. And then so like the connections to rhetoric theory that I found in this article is it provides insight into the potential for persuasive language to shape public opinion and influence policy decisions. And it also explains how persuasive language was used heavily in the terms of promoting mining to make it seem like that would just solve poverty, but really a lot of things like needed to go into that to be able to reduce that. And then connections to like ethos and logos is what I found in this article, because it talks about like the credibility of the World Bank and like the stuff that they're doing. And it also came from the Department of Political Science from Indiana University, Purdue University. So like that's a very credible source. And then logos was used because it uses the logical side to analyze if mining will actually help to reduce poverty. And it kind of just suggests that language can be used to influence people's beliefs and behaviors on this topic. And in the case of mining and poverty reduction, the rhetoric around the potential benefits of mining may be used to persuade stakeholders to supporting mining projects. Okay. And then some of the knowledge that I gained from this article was it provided an insight on the use of persuasive language to shape and influence public opinion, and the need for critical analysis of persuasive language to ensure it accurately reflects the situation. And the article's analysis of rhetoric surrounding mining and poverty reduction also underscores the importance of considering the social and economic context in which persuasive language is used to promote certain ideas or initiatives. And because of the language that was used, it's important to see that what is actually being said, if it's actually true, such as promoting mining to help poverty, but that isn't like 100% the truth. So you have to like really look into like the language being used and see if you are getting the full story and just taking a better look into all the information provided to make sure you're getting the whole truth and not getting like biased information due to the language that's used. And that's why we're excited.
Thank you so much for sharing your article here. As we're looking at, again, the ways that rhetoric is being used, applied, and situated in a more contemporary way, I think this is a great example here of how rhetoric, again, is moving away from this very like public speaking bent, and instead looking at things including public relations, looking at how organizations behave, relate, and communicate with one another. And the idea that rhetoric can be used in a pejorative way, right? The idea of rhetoric being this kind of negative thing, but also the idea that rhetoric is motivating, right? Rhetoric can impact and move people toward a direction or toward a particular social, political outcome that's seen as particularly important. So again, this theory is relevant. It's used in a lot of contexts, and it's a theory that can be really helpful as we're understanding and trying to unpack the strategies that are being used if there's any emphasis on persuasion that you're looking for. So I'm going to be sharing a clip. Again, this is from Mark Antony's speech from the famous play Julius Caesar by William Shakespeare. This is a very classic adaptation of Caesar that features Marlon Brando as Mark Antony. Again, the situation is that Brutus and the other co-conspirators, right, have killed Julius Caesar, and in many ways, the people are very sympathetic to Brutus and the conspirators. They believe, okay, it makes sense that Caesar was killed, right? Mark Antony, however, is much more sympathetic to Caesar and wants to turn the people against the conspirators. So the situation and context of this speech is important here, right? The people are very much against Mark Antony, and so the rhetorical strategies and efforts that he's using here are in many ways trying to respond to and address a public that's not on his side. So I want you to take a look at this, and then after that, of the three types of rhetoric, what does this fall into? What type of argument is being made here? And then lastly, picking a canon and how this speech utilizes the canon. So after seeing this, take some time on your own or with a partner to discuss and share your thoughts on this for attendance.
President. The evil that men do lives after them, the good is often covered with their bones, so let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus had told you Caesar was ambitious. If it was so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously had Caesar answered it. Here are the leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man. He was my friend, faithful and just to me. Brutus said he was ambitious. Brutus is an honorable man. He has brought many captives on the road whose ransoms in the general compass filled. This would be the seem ambitious. When the poor have cried, Caesar has wept. Vision should be made of granite stuff. Yet Brutus said he was ambitious. Brutus is an honorable man. It is an honorable man. I presented him a kingly crown. He is free to kill. And surely is an honorable man. I think not that his people what Brutus spoke. But yet they to speak what I do know. You only love him on something I'm wrong. Even the most of him. Just to Brutus speak. And you will not believe him. I'm not gonna stop them there and see them, I'm not forcing them to come back to me. Thinks there is much reason in his faith. Give that secret, right wrong. Hear the words committed faith. These words, you will not take the crown. They go to sin. Begin to speak. Yesterday, the word of Caesar might have stood against the world. Now lies he there, and none so poor to do him reverence. Oh, Master, if I were disposed to stir your hearts and minds from mutiny and rage, I should prove it wrong and catch it wrong. Who you all know are honorable men. I will not do that wrong. The wrong you never wrong. But here's the parchment. It's the seal of Peter. I found it in his closet. This is will. But the Peter is they would go and kiss that Caesar and get their necks in his sacred blood. It's not you know, I'll see that you. Make your money. For God, you know not to show me.
I know the audio is a little bit, this folder a little bit challenging. If you are interested in checking out the text, there's also a full text available for you to look at as well as you're working through this, right? So again, Mark Antony is loyal to Caesar. The people are generally supportive of Caesar being killed, and his goal is to convince them to go against the saboteurs and to support Caesar and people loyal to him, right? So with that knowledge and some of the things that you noticed, or again, you might search as you're looking through the text of this well-known speech. Of the three types of rhetoric, what does this speech fall into? What types of arguments are being made here, and what canon would you explore that gets into this content here too? So you can take some time, you can either work alone or work with a partner on this one, and we'll talk about it together in a little bit. Take another couple minutes to finish up. As we're wrapping up, how many people said forensic for the type of rhetoric? Epididactic? Deliberative? So it's a combination of forensic and deliberative, right? It's using forensic, as you all rightly point out, to make sense of the past, what happened to Caesar, here's his will, but it's also deliberative in its goal to try to motivate the Romans to turn against the conspirators like Brutus and Cassius, right? How many people notice the use of ethos? Okay. Talking about some of his background, his relationship to Caesar, pathos, right? Talking about his love of Rome, logos. So the repeated use of "but Brutus is an honorable man" is used strategically here, right? Starting out being used to positively frame the conspirators, but he's presenting contradictory evidence. He's saying, well, but Caesar rejected the crown before he was willing to accept. He was kind, he did a lot, but they're saying that he's bad and, you know, they're honorable. So he's like repeatedly using that refrain to try to get people to turn against and question the conspirators as well. And then in terms of canons, there's a lot we can look here in terms of the structure, the organization, the delivery, the points that are being made here, right? There's a very deliberative effort to try to turn the public's attention away, which again, we see a lot in the study of rhetoric, study of speeches and public address. A lot of literary examples are great applications of this theory. But this theory has to think about the changes in media, circulation of technology, advertising, and so forth that can be used here. So to wrap up for today, we took some time to talk about rhetoric and how rhetoric is used. Take some time to prepare your first application paper due on Sunday. And then on Wednesday, we'll have Izzy who will be talking to us about dramatism. So we'll be looking at that and another application of rhetoric here. So please email or pass forward if you haven't done so already. Have a great rest of your day and see you Wednesday.